We're looking forward to a lively discussion with veteran Arizona journalist Jim Nintzel, who will discuss his career thus far, his move to the Tucson Sentinel.com, and his insights into the coming year in Arizona's wild and wacky politics. He covers politics for the Tucson Sentinel, an online news agency based in southern Arizona. Prior to joining the Sentinel, Jim spent more than 3 decades as a reporter and editor with Tucson Weekly, covering politics, science, and rock and roll. He has been named a Journalist of the Year by the Arizona Press Club and the Newspaper Association of Arizona, and has won more than 50 state and national awards for his work. He has previously worked for the local PBS station, hosting a political roundtable, and has appeared on CBS, ABC, CNN, and other national news organizations, as well as NPR affiliates. He taught government reporting at the University of Arizona Journalism School for more than 15 years. Let's get a nice reception to Jim Nintzel. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, Jim, it's your show.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm certainly sorry I missed the Chinese buffet, but here we are on Zoom instead of meeting live. So really terrific to have this opportunity to talk to you all. I got into journalism, more than 3 decades ago, almost by accident. Going to work for the Tucson Weekly when it was just a tiny little 28-page newspaper, about 5 years old. And it's sad for me to say today that the Tucson Weekly is a tiny little 24-page newspaper that is now closing in on 40. But that said, I did a lot of odd jobs around the Tucson Weekly. I actually got hired initially to deliver ad proofs for our clients, the advertisers. This was in the days before fax machines and email and whatnot. So I'd have to drive across town in a little tiny 1969 Volkswagen Bug in the heat of the summer with no air conditioning and visit all these different clients. And I'd show them the ad proof, and I would collect a check from them I'd collect the check on a good day, and head on back to headquarters. And from there, they said, well, why don't you get in charge of our distribution? So I did that for a while. And they said, why don't you try doing paste up? So in those old days before pagination, we had long columns of type that we'd have to put wax onto, and then we'd stick them to these giant boards and paste up and use X-Acto knives to cut out illustrations. And it was a much more hands-on process than you have today with the magic of computers. I was there for that whole revolution. And as that started getting underway and the desktop publishing revolution started getting underway, I started saying, well, how about if we start doing some news? And slowly but surely kind of burrowed my way onto the editorial team. And that was a time in the 1990s when really alternative weeklies were taking off across the country. There were always, the granddaddy of them all was the Village Voice. And we had the Phoenix New Times up in Phoenix. And of course, they would go on to start gobbling up all those 2 papers would go around gobbling up these smaller operations all around the country. And they ended up with a massive collection of alt weeklies that all merged together. The Tucson Weekly was not part of that. We remained independent and locally owned all the way up to the year 2000. And by then we were a good, healthy 80-page a week newspaper. And we were just, it was a joy to be working with the team that we were working with. I was extraordinarily fortunate to be part of that crew. I covered a lot of politics, I got involved in writing about science. I got involved with writing about rock and roll and music. And it was actually pretty much anything I got interested in, I was allowed to write about, which is such a rare blessing in this business. It still astonishes me that I got away with what I got away with for as long as I did. About the year 2000, we were purchased by a company called Wick Communications, which you may be familiar with. It puts out a lot of newspapers in Southern Arizona, the Sierra Vista Herald, the Nogales International. They've got papers down in Bisbee and Douglas Dispatch, whole collection of small newspapers down in that area. And then they have some other properties kind of far flung across the country. And the Wicks treated us pretty well. They kept our page count up. They supported us. They put resources into the operation, and things continued along. It was a little less like being on a pirate ship and a little more like being conscripted into the Navy. We had to follow a few more rules about how we approached doing our jobs and whatnot, but it was still an extraordinary opportunity. Really was able to continue covering pretty much anything I wanted to. The congressional races when Jim Colby retired were really a fascinating thing to cover. The ascent of Gabby Giffords, the very unfortunate assassination attempt upon her life. We were there on the ground almost right away, and that was just probably the worst thing I ever had to write about in this town. Not even probably, it was definitely that's just the worst thing to have to write about. Very, very, very sad days in our town. Continued along until about 2014, when we were purchased again by an outfit actually out of Colorado. Our owner was in Colorado, and they owned a lot of small newspaper chains, and they had this idea in their head that if they combined the Tucson Weekly with the Oro Valley Explorer and the Marana News and Inside Tucson Business, and boy, there were a half dozen papers. Catalina Foothills News, the Foothills News, and something called the Desert Times. I don't know if y'all have ever seen a copy of it. I think to this day, I'm not sure I've ever seen a copy of the Desert Times out on the sands. But that was a big change. They were much more concerned about making money. They thought they could really consolidate what they had there and cut a lot of costs. They ended up shrinking our size. Our page count went from 68 pages down to 32 pages. You know, we really saw a lot less room to do what we were used to be able to do. It was definitely a sad turn of events. Very bottom line oriented company, but I will say they still seem to have some concern about doing some journalism. We ultimately, they were going to fire me, actually. I think in 2016, I got the word that the axe was coming down and my days were numbered. And I got the call one Friday to come in and meet with the editor at the time. And I said, I can't come in. I'm taking care of my kid today. Can I come in on Monday instead? And they said, yeah, okay, come in on Monday. So I went in on Monday figuring this is a good day to die, as the Klingons say. And I arrived there, and lo and behold, the guy who was going to fire me ended up quitting. So they gave me his job instead. And I found myself suddenly in an assistant editor job under our editor. There was a woman named Mari Herreras who assumed control of the collection of papers. I'd worked with Mari for a long time at Tucson Weekly, and I was her assistant. And it was a big change. Obviously, there was not the time to go out and report on politics that there used to be, or report on much of anything, as there are a lot of administrative duties to be taken care of. And the duties were so heavy that Mari quit less than a year later. And they said, do you want this job of running these 6 newspapers? And I thought to myself, well, that sounds absolutely horrifying. But I realized if I didn't take the job, I was probably going to get a boss who I didn't like very much. So I said, give it a try. And that was in 2017, spring of 2017. And I took over all papers and the associated special publications. Like we did a tourist magazine here and there, and there were the book of lists out of the Inside Tucson Business publication, and there was a lot to do, and we were down to a staff of 5 people. I had 5 editorial employees plus myself trying to put out these half dozen newspapers every week. And it was a heavy lift, I will say, but I was very fortunate in that I was able to put together a really solid team. I was able to find some really terrific reporters who could handle we not only had to worry about the goings on in Tucson, but also the goings on in Oro Valley and Marana. And because I really do believe those small communities deserve good community newspapers that are going to report on the goings on of their town council and their police departments and their community. So definitely wanted to create the best products I could under the resources that we had available to us. And I think we did a pretty good job in that first 3 years from 2017 to 2020. We built up page counts again. We were trying to be as smart as we could with our meager resources. I think we brought home 60 some editorial awards over those 3 years between the different publications. And I think we did, as best a job as one could, although there was certainly a lot less in Tucson Weekly than there was in the heyday. And then the pandemic hit. And that took just a lot of wind out of our sails, obviously, because the job of the Tucson Weekly and these other publications in a lot of ways was bringing people together. And that was really not a very good idea in April of 2020, as I think we all recall. It seems like a bad dream now sometimes, but it really happened. About a year later, in 2021, we managed to get through the pandemic, or through the first year of the pandemic. We were purchased by a new company out of Phoenix. And that company turned out to be a very tight-fisted organization. And over the next year, the squeeze was really on. They never told me not to report the news, but they also didn't give me the resources to do it. And I'm afraid that it was when I finally got to the 1,000th cut, I think that was it for me. It was definitely a death of 1,000 cuts, and there were 1,000. And I finally realized I just couldn't handle all of the responsibilities that were being laid upon me, and I decided to walk away from the operation in July of last year. It was pretty much the anniversary of my hiring date. A good 33 years earlier, I felt I had done pretty much everything I had ever set out to do in the business, and I really felt like it just wasn't going to get any better. The likelihood of conditions improving seemed very slim. So I took off and didn't really know what I was going to do next, but I felt like I could take a little time off. A few months later, I was contacted by the Arizona Daily Star, and the Star editor, Jill Jordan Spitz at the time, asked if I was interested in applying for a job there. They were working on getting a grant from a nonprofit organization called Report for America. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Report for America, but it's a terrific organization, relatively new. So Report for America,
and I know you'll be here,
is a terrific organization that gives grants to newsrooms across the United States in the hopes of improving the reporting staff. Because I think probably everyone here would agree that having good, accurate, trustworthy information about the people who are running our governments, who are running for office, who are influencing our government is a cornerstone of democracy. It's a vital element to helping the citizens understand what's going on and helping citizens make good decisions when it comes time to vote. And so Report for America looks at it as, a Peace Corps kind of organization where and they mostly work with younger reporters and try to help them get their start. I am one of the few older folks, I will say, describing myself, who was invited to be part of the Corps this year. So the Star had worked for a year to get this grant, and it was all going well, and I'd met with them and everything was on track. And then I got a call from Jill telling me that the Star, the Lee Enterprises, their parent company, had decided to decline the grant, and it wasn't going to work out after all. I was disappointed because I was looking forward to getting back into the game. But as it worked out, the Lee Enterprises had other plans, and their plans involved firing Jill and a whole bunch of other folks in what was already a pretty small newsroom. And as a result of that, they couldn't accept a grant to expand their newsroom. The Report for America doesn't look fondly on the idea of replacing reporters. They want to expand news staff. So they were not able to accept the grant. And I thought that was it. And then I got a call from Dylan Smith, who runs the Tucson Sentinel. I hope you folks are all aware of the Tucson Sentinel. It's a online news organization that's been around for about 13 years now. Dylan was working at the Tucson Citizen, the late and lamented afternoon newspaper, when it closed down. And he just decided, you know what, let's not do paper, let's do something online. And he launched this online newspaper at a time when there were just a few dozen of them across the United States, and became part of meeting with other folks and developing best practices. And they developed a group called Lion, which is local independent online newspapers. I'm not sure what they're honestly, they're not papers, so I don't know the exact acronym. Forgive me for that. Anyway, they formed a group called Lion, and you've got a lot of these organizations across the country now, because we are seeing the kinds of cuts that we saw at Tucson Weekly and Tucson Local Media, that parent organization. We are seeing the cuts that you're seeing at the Arizona Daily Star. And there is a dearth of local reported news compared to what we used to have. And so these online organizations are launching to try to fill that gap and to provide people with the news that they're missing out elsewhere. So I've always admired Dylan for what he was able to accomplish. It is no easy thing to get something like that off the ground and sustain it for more than a decade, which he has managed to do with the support of people like you in the community who support his nonprofit organization, and through the support of grants like the ones that we have received from Report for America and other organizations that have been generous and believe, again, in supporting our nonprofit mission of informing Tucson about what's important to you. So I signed on in July. Dylan said, "Hey, I can get this grant. If you're interested, there's still an opportunity for you to get in and start reporting on what's going on in this town again." And I said, yes. And I'll tell you, I could make a lot more money in public relations. I could have gone to work for any number of government agencies and been their spokesperson and done the thing and gotten a decent pension and taken the money. But I believe in what we're doing here. I believe its importance in keeping people involved in what's going on. I jumped right in, got involved with covering the city council primaries, and I have been. We're moving on to the general election now. There's a lot that we're working on in terms of following what's going to be going on with the state legislature. The session's over, but we're going to be talking with the folks who are our elected officials from there. There's going to be a lot going on the federal level. I think I did a story a couple of weeks back about how the A-10 is going away, and we're getting a new mission here in Arizona. There's a abortion initiative that's coming up on the ballot. And provided they're able to get the signatures, we wrote about that last week. And I'm just thrilled to be working alongside this crew at the Tucson Sentinel. I will say there's 9 people in our morning meetings. So that is a good number of journalists fanning out across the city. We're doing, I think, some pretty amazing work out there. Last week, you might have seen just a terrific story from one of our interns, Natalie Robbins, working with Dylan, wrote a story about a guy who died in the jail 2.5 months ago, and his family was never notified, and they were searching for him and trying to track it down. And it was because Natalie was looking through autopsy reports from the jail that she figured out who this guy was and did a little search and discovered his family was looking for him and was able to bring them some closure. Very sad closure, but I think, that's the sort of thing when you have reporters out there who are looking through public records, who are trying to find out what's going on in your community, we're going to find stories like that. And, I just am dazzled by the level of talent that I'm working alongside. Paul Ingram is doing some of the best border reporting in the country right here in Tucson, Arizona. Dylan, not only manages to administer this entire operation, but he's out there reporting as well. We've got 2 interns, Natalie, who I just mentioned, and another guy, Daniel, he came all the way over here from his studies at Oxford because he wanted to be part of our organization this summer, and he's doing a great job. So that's where we are at the Tucson Sentinel, and I'll tell you what, the support we need is support from you, honestly, because this grant that we got to pay my salary only covers half of it, and so we do need local support. If you're moved to join our Watchdog Club, I certainly hope you'll give that some thought. You can make a one-time donation to us. You can make a monthly subscription to us like you would to maybe something like AZPM or the Arizona Daily Star. But I do think, when you look at the cutbacks that are happening in the corporate-owned media, when you look at how much thinner the Arizona Daily Star, and I don't want to throw shade towards the reporters there at all, because I think they are doing the very best job they can under far less than ideal circumstances. And I think I love a daily newspaper. I don't want to see a daily newspaper go away in this town. But I do think that there are people making decisions who are out of town, who are happy to take the dollars from our community and send them back to headquarters and to people who are making way too much money at the expense of our community. And I think, you're not going to see the same kind of news there, and you're not going to see the same kind of news in the Tucson Weekly or the Oro Valley Explorer or any of those smaller papers that you used to see. And that's where we're hoping to fill the gap, and that's where we need your help. So if there's any way you can see yourself clear to helping us, go over to TucsonSentinel.com and see what we have about the Watchdog Club and sign up. It's nonprofit news and it's tax deductible. And the more you can give us, the more we can give back to you in the community. So we thank you very much. If you're already a supporter, we hope that you do become a supporter, and we hope that you tell 7 of your friends about the Tucson Sentinel and what we do, and encourage them to join along as well. But I guess I will leave it there following my big ask and invite questions from the audience.
Well, and we are ready to roll. What do you think of the story today, Jim, about a newspaper in Kansas being raided by the local police?
Well, I think it's absolutely horrifying, and you read some of the details of that where they seem to be making up some kind of identity theft charges against this newspaper because someone gave them a tip, and I don't know how much background anyone in here is familiar with, but there was a small paper and they had received a tip about a woman who owned a restaurant, apparently, and she was applying for a liquor license. And they got a tip that at some point she had been arrested for a DUI, which would affect your ability to apply for a liquor license. And they were given some information about her, and the paper actually decided, hey, we're not going to run this story. We think there's something hinky about our source. We're a little concerned. Maybe we're getting set up for something here. And so they didn't even go forward with the story. And then the next thing they knew, the police in the town were knocking down their doors. They were taking all their computers. They took the reporters' cell phones. They searched the publisher's house. His mother, who was, I think, 98 years old, died a day or two after it all from they say the shock of having folks storming around the house, and they took all the business records, and Lord knows what kind of case they're trying to cook up. But it's an example of some of the tactics that people are using against newspapers these days. And we're already been branded enemies of the American people, and it's by the president of the United States. And I think there's a hostility towards the press that is growing. And I think what we saw there was absolutely appalling. And I certainly hope there are legal ramifications for the police force that went forward with such a blatant disregard of the First Amendment and standard news gathering.
Well, thanks for that great answer. What advice, Jim, would you give for young people interested in a career in journalism?
Run as fast as you can in the other direction. No, I joke. I actually obviously still believe in the career, as I'm back in it after a 365-day weekend. I think it's really important. Number one, read a lot and figure out what it is you're interested in, but just read a lot. Just if you're not a good reader, you're probably not going to be a good writer. So I develop a sense of curiosity about the world around you. The business is changing a lot. The old strategy of going to work for a publication in a small market and then honing your chops and understanding how to work a beat and then moving on to larger markets and hopefully landing at the Washington Post or the New York Times is not really the most successful model, in my opinion. I think it makes a lot more sense these days to find an area where you really want to excel and learn as much as you can about that, develop an audience for that, and whether you're working for a publication, old school publication, or you're working for a brand new startup, the key is to be able to understand that you need to build your own audience. You need to build your own brand. I think you need to have a reputation as somebody who understands what it is you're talking about. The ability to get out there and do brand new things with something like Substack is creating a new type of opportunity. It's not the old type of opportunity, but it is a new type of opportunity. If you develop those skills and you know what it is you're writing about, the big guys like the New York Times and Washington may well take a notice in what you're doing and say, hey, we want this guy on our team. So there's a real mix of, I think, understanding how to get out there and sell yourself and make sure that you're the brand rather than the platform is the brand, but is the brand. And so that I think would, in a nutshell, would be my advice.
Okay. Jim, do you think the classic business model of newspapers is no longer viable? Do you think that digital production and distribution is superior to newsprint? that is distributed to newsstands and homes?
Well, they're different things. And I'm not going to say that one is necessarily superior to the other, because I really do think that, like I said, I love a daily newspaper. I love the feel of the paper. And I think what was beautiful about the newspaper in the olden days is there was a lot of different things in there, right? It was general interest. You might want to do the crossword or the junior jumble. You might want to read the comics. You might care about the box scores on the sports page. You might care about the movie reviews, or you may want to read the news and know what's going on in your community. Any of those things might lead you to grab a copy of the newspaper, and if it only costs 50 cents, you're not really out that much. Or even less, 35 cents when I was a Tucson Citizen paper boy in this town, which is where I got my start in the newspaper business in a way, I suppose. And I loved sitting there and reading the newspaper when I folded it, and it's been an incredible honor to work alongside so many of the people whose bylines I saw in high school as I folded those newspapers. And very sad to write the obits of some, like the legendary columnist Jeff Smith, or Chuck Bowden, the extraordinary author, who also started writing at the Tucson Citizen way back in the 1980s. But I digress a little bit. So what I think has happened as newspapers have cut the way they have cut is there's fewer and fewer of those things that make people want to pick up the paper. And so I think they're in a bad spiral. I don't think anyone's going to tell you the newspaper is giving you what it used to give you 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's sad, but it is sort of where things are going. And I think at this point, the economic model still works in the sense that publishers can make money, but they're not investing in news coverage. I mean, the Tucson Weekly is now an arts and entertainment organization because it costs money to have good reporters who are going to be out there telling the important stories in your community. And there's still plenty to like in the Tucson Weekly, but it's not the paper it was in years past, and nor is the Arizona Daily Star. And I think that you're going to see that continue to decline. You're seeing daily newspapers across the country cutting out a few days a week of circulation, for example, to save on the cost of paper. The problem is the price keeps going up as well. And, when it was 35 cents, no big deal to pop down a quarter and a dime. But when it's $1.50, and it's a little more of an intimidating figure for a paper that's going to give you half of what it gave you before. And the annual subscription rates are pretty steep too. Electronic publishing has its own advantages, especially once you've gathered an audience like Tucson.com has, or Tucson Weekly had, or Tucson Sentinel has. I think that when people are coming back and they're aware of you, then they're going to come back and see your stories and you can reach a pretty good audience. But the challenge is always whether or not you're able to reach an ever-growing audience, and you're not reaching the audience that you used to reach. The potential is there. And the nice thing about an electronic publishing is that you don't have a limit to how long your stories can be. There's no news hole to fill, so you can go greatly into depth on things. There are ways to put together stories so that you can link them together, so you don't always have to put all the background in. So sometimes you can do shorter stories that advance a story and say, hey, if you want to know the latest on what's going on with the outside spending in Tucson City primary campaigns, read this story. But also, if you want to understand the background of it, you can click here. So if readers already have that background, or they're not as interested in that background, they don't have to, but you can have it there for those who might want to know more. So, I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both form. Online, there's just a lot of noise as well. And you're competing with a lot of different efforts to get people's attention. And so that can be a challenge as well.
Okay. Jim, what is your view about the Pima GOP disrupting school boards the Pima GOP on August 5th staged a nonpartisan Values in Education forum where the speakers were the Pima GOP chair, second vice chair, and third vice chair.
Well, I think they certainly have a constitutional right to hold meetings and, you know, and say their feelings about what's going on in a particular place. I think it's, again, incumbent on those of us in the media to be able to attend those things and say, hey, you know, this is what's being said. This part is true. This part isn't true. You know, I think that plays a big role in that kind of thing. I'm not a big fan of disrupting meetings on either side of the aisle. You know, there was a meeting of a commission that's trying to decide whether to do a new jail or not, and people who are opposed to that idea came in with a marching band last week and disrupted that meeting, and there was some coffee flying and granola bars flying and charges of assault, and it said, well, not formal charges. There were people saying they'd been assaulted and a lot of other stuff going on there. So, you know, I think you should I'm somebody who falls more on the side of, let people say what they're going to say and respond with your own free speech, or, expose what's true and what isn't true. But, sometimes that doesn't make a difference because people are generally going to believe what they're going to believe, and they may not believe that you're telling the truth when you say that someone else isn't telling the truth. So, you know, that's something that's out of the control of those of us in the media, though.
Okay, Jim, considering the resources available to the city council, what do you think the city of Tucson can realistically do to address the homeless problem in our town?
Well, I am going to be doing a lot of reporting on that in the next few months as I cover the Tucson City Council meetings, or elections, Tucson City Council elections, and our mayoral race. I think we're going to be having a debate about that among the candidates, and I think that I am now just starting to look into what's going on that front. I'm real interested in what's going on in the Thrive in the 05 area. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that's a city program that involves trying to do reinvestment and provide services to people who live roughly between, I think, Speedway and Miracle Mile and Blackledge and Stone Avenue and I-10. In the 85705 zip code. It's called Thrive in the 05. It's a program that has been really got its seeds almost 2 decades ago as something called the Oracle Project, happening in Ward 3, and has grown out of that to encompass a larger area, and has just this month received what I think is the second largest single grant in the city's history. They got a $50 million grant to do some rehabbing over at Tucson House. And they're going to be building some more apartment complexes, and also spending money on developing a community kitchen in conjunction with the community food bank, and figuring out ways to provide better services and education opportunities and whatnot. Pima College is right on the edge of that, or right in that area as well, over there at Speedway and Stone. So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts in that area, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it and understanding better how the city has been responding, and how the opposing candidates think the city should be responding.
Okay, Craig, you have your hand up electronically. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, Jim, I used to look at the weekly and always enjoyed the skinny. Does something like the skinny translate to the online system, or is it a property of Tucson Weekly?
You know, no one's using the name, so I suspect we could pick it up without much trouble. There might be some confusion, brand confusion out there if we were to do that. However, in my role as a Report for America core member, I am obligated to be a reporter and not really a commentator on what I'm seeing out there. So that's not going to be my role as a citizen. I see my role as being a more, I imagine I'll be doing things in terms of analysis of what's going on out there. We have a piece coming out later today about looking at the final reports out of the primary election and who won where and what kind of precincts and how much money was spent and that sort of thing, where I feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, this is an analysis of what's going on there. But in terms of shooting off my own mouth, I'm trying to find a new way of doing that within the guidelines of the grant that I'm fortunate enough to have received.
Thank you.
Okay. Jim, what does it take to get an article written about one of our candidates?
Are you saying Tucson City Council candidates, or are you saying like the legislative races, or what are you?
Well, let me ask the asker. Karen?
One of our House or Senate candidates.
Oh, so I am interested in writing about all the folks who are going to be running for office. Right now, I've been on the job, I think 5 weeks, and I really leaned hard into that primary initially, the city council primaries, because the early voting started about 5 days after I started, and those 5 days included a weekend and 4th of July holiday. So I was a little behind the 8 ball starting when I did, and I had gone out actually and interviewed a few of them before I started because I figured I'd better hit the ground running. But even then, it was we were a little slow. So the focus was really on writing about profiles of Lane Santa Cruz and Miguel Ortega and Lisa Nutt and Paul Cunningham for those particular races. And now we've got the Tucson City Council races ahead. So I've been meeting with all of those folks. I think I've caught up with all of them except the Libertarians. So we're going to be rolling out profiles of the council candidates because that election's coming up, in November. But after that, I think we'll be seeing a lot more attention paid to the folks who are running for a state, Senate, and House. I think that's one of the things that I used to love to do at the Tucson Weekly was the opportunity to go out and write about these races because I don't think they were getting a whole lot of attention from the daily papers or the TV stations back in the day. And I always thought that was an area where I enjoyed going out and talking to them and finding out what they were up to and who was running and all the rest of that. Can't say that we were 100% successful with everything we tried to do even back then. But I will tell you, anytime you think there's something I should be writing about, whether it's a profile of the candidates or something that's going on with the police or something that's going on at City Hall or the county supervisors or the school boards, I am very happy to get your emails at jim.nintzel@tucsonsentinel.com, where you can also join our Watchdog Club, and also over at jimnintzel@gmail.com. So you can reach me at either of those, and I'm always eager to hear what folks think would make a good story.
Well, Jim, this is a good question. You can put on your U of A professor hat. And can you contrast the difference between the Tucson Sentinel and the Arizona Agenda, the Tucson Agenda, and the Arizona Luminaria?
Absolutely, I can. And let me just say I respect all these folks for trying to fill this niche that I think not a niche, but fill the absence that we're seeing from the mainstream corporate-owned media. So the Sentinel, as I said, has been around for about 13 years. We have new stuff going up on our site every day. Some of it is material that we'll pick up from other nonprofits like the Arizona Mirror, which is based in Phoenix and does a lot of reporting on the legislature. and statewide politics, then a lot of that is relevant to us down here in Southern Arizona. So we like to bring you that news on top of the local stories that we're breaking. So we're, I think, probably fairly active in terms of what we're producing. The Arizona Luminaria, younger than us, more recently started, definitely working hard to establish its own spot within this nonprofit media sphere. And then you have these new Arizona Agenda, I think is about 2 years old. They're actually coming down here to have a birthday party at the Loft in a few weeks. And so that's that is it's not a nonprofit venture as the Sentinel and the Luminaria are. But the Arizona Agenda actually got its start with a couple of folks I have tremendous respect for, Hank Stevenson and Rachel Leingang, and they were reporters who had worked at Hank. Actually, I helped him get his start in the business. He was a student of mine at the U of A, and I thought he was super talented. So I said, hey, why don't you start doing some stuff for us? I brought him in to cover elections back in 2008. I figured the students at the U of A were young and green, but so were a lot of people running for the Arizona legislature at that point. And so why not put them together? And I used those guys to help me write profiles, and we created a whole website based on what's going on with the races, and they were great. It was not just Hank, but a whole crew of interns from the U of A. And Hank went on to really become an outstanding, one of the very best journalists in the state. Worked at the Star covering education. He's worked down in Nogales. He worked at Capital Times doing the yellow sheets. And he also got frustrated with the cuts and the way that he was treated by the corporate media. And he and Rachel were lucky enough to land a $100,000 grant from this Substack organization. I don't know how many are familiar with Substack, but basically it's a platform for newsletters, and you can they handle a lot of the behind the scenes technical stuff for you, so you don't have to worry so much about that. And anybody can basically launch their own little publication. And they were one of, like, I think less than a dozen groups, 10 groups, 12 groups that got these $100,000 grants. And they went off and running and really built a solid journalism organization. And now they're spinning off and launching something similar down here in Tucson called the Tucson Agenda. And that's being run by Caitlin Schmidt and the Kurt Pendergrast, who are both Arizona Daily Star veterans. Kurt was actually one of the folks laid off in that Monday morning massacre I mentioned earlier. And they're off and running too. The thing that the agenda and the Tucson Agenda and Arizona Agenda both do is more of a newsletter. And it's a great, to me, they do original reporting up at the top of their newsletter, and then they typically will do a big roundup of other stories that are happening to help keep you informed. If you're not reading every single newspaper out there, you can scan through there, and there's links to these other stories that are being produced. So it's kind of it's both original reporting and a real good daily roundup of what's going on out there. I think they are providing a real valuable service, and I definitely wish them. I hope the Tucson operation does just as well as the statewide one is doing. I think that's another model that I think we'll see it develop. And I think the newsletter model is interesting. In excuse me, in the olden days, we really just put our stuff out on the web and said this is where our stories are, and people would come to the website and read them, and things change so much in this industry. There was this whole rise of social media, and then you were able to, then at one point the Facebook and the Twitter were like, oh, we want to help publishers get their stories out, and they started helping us in terms of putting, when we would post stories, they would be high in the feed, and at some point Facebook and Twitter decided they didn't really want to help publishers out so much and really started burying our stories in the feed. So that model of distribution really came and went in a hurry. And now the things that independent journalists, like the folks at the Sentinel or the folks at the Tucson or Arizona Agenda, are discovering is that newsletters and delivering directly to people's mailboxes and letting them read it that way with the ability to click and link back to the original website or the other stories that you're being directed to, and then trying to mix in some events seem to be the model of 2023. And boy, if I could predict what 2026 was going to bring, I'd probably be a wealthier man than I am.
Okay, do you have plans to do a detailed story about cinema as our independent?
Well, I have plans to cover that U.S. Senate race, and I think there's going to be a lot of different stories that come out. That's really the marquee race, I think, of 2024 here in Arizona. I think there are at this point, three really big stories I see emerging in the 2023 election run, and one of them is certainly that Senate race. We don't know yet if she's going to run or if she's running as an independent now that she has left the Democratic Party. We don't know who the Republican nominee is, and we don't know who the Democratic nominee is. Obviously, Ruben Gallego seems to be in the driver's seat on the Democratic side. And on the other side, you already have Mark Lamb, the sheriff in Pinal County, setting up his own campaign to run for that seat. And you have Kari Lake, assuming she does not find herself successful in her court endeavors and appointed to the governorship of Arizona, looking to run for that seat. If rumors are true. And I think both those things have a lot of Republicans nervous because you saw what happened with Kari Lake in this last campaign, and obviously she did not find success with a certain percentage of Republicans or independents that was necessary to win a statewide race.
Okay. Any last question? Okay. Well, Jim, thank you for a wonderful program. Thank you for such a great question and answer round. We're so glad you're back in the saddle. Let's give Jim a big thank you for being here.
And be sure to give the Sentinel some support, folks. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I think it's great for reporters to be able to talk to folks about what's going on out there and how it is we do our jobs and this whole changing media landscape, because it's changed a lot since the Jurassic Age when I got into the biz.
Well, you're always welcome.
Thank you.